All right. Buonasera, everybody. Salam alaikum. My name is Isabel Gill. I won't get much into who I am because we have a long agenda today and we'd like to get started. So to welcome us and to open the precedent for today is Franco Annelli, who's the rector of Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore, full professor of private law at the Faculty of Law, to open up.
Good afternoon. I'm really grateful to the Italian Commissioner, Mr. Paolo Glisenti, for hosting our university events. A special thank to the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifice Foundations and to its president, Anna Maria Tarantola, and a warm greeting to all the participants here and remotely. Why Università Cattolica decided to participate to Expo Dubai? Intercultural dialogue and global dimension are the two common issues of both universities and universal expositions, particularly true here in Dubai. Expo's claim itself summarizes the mission of universities as an institution, connecting minds and creating the future. Connecting minds and creating the future through research, exchange, dialogue, and education, encouraging a critical discussion on the issues that affect our future and offering their expertise and their natural predisposition to address future generations. In this sense goes, among many others, the joint initiative of the Strategic Alliance of Catholic Research Universities, SACRU, and the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifice Foundation, which, through the research work entitled More Women Leadership for a Better World, devotes a careful analysis to gender inequalities, contributing to tackle with Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality. There's a key word in the title of today's meeting, care. The word underlying this title is a connection between women leadership and care, the latter being, hopefully, a specific feature of the former. Care, as we know, has different shades of meaning. Care for each other, care for the planet, but also care for institutions, including university, where future generations are educated. Caring is one of the dimensions, the noblest perhaps, of educational activity. An Italian priest and educator, Don Lorenzo Milani, was used to hang a sign on a wall in his classroom saying, "I care," to make explicit his message as an educator, to care, to be concerned. He invited us to take into our hands the future of children, to educate them in defense of the values of mutual respect, civic commitment, and brotherhood. This message is still valid today. It is no coincidence that Ursula von der Leyen quoted Don Milani's motto to make it the claim of the European Union in her speech on the State of Union on May 6, 2021. We, women and men, are called to care and to take care. Beside the two common elements between universities and universal expositions, I mentioned before, intercultural dialogue and global dimension. Let me conclude with a third shared issue, the goal of a social and cultural growth. Since a century, our university answers the call of society through proactive engagement and partnering. The cooperation with Padiglione Italia is one of the first steps into our new century, in the same direction and with the same commitment. Thank you for this opportunity.
Unfortunately, we don't have all of our speakers here today, but technology has helped us to gain quite a lot of momentum. Our next speaker is quite a phenomena, and she will be joining us remotely. Anna Maria Tarantola is the president of Centesimus Annus Pontifice Foundation. She is an Italian manager, former director of the Bank of Italy, and former president of RAI. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to Padiglione Italia and the Catholic universities for the opportunity to present this research, More Women Leadership for a Better World, Care as a Driver for Our Common Home. This research is a project launched jointly by the Centesimus Annus Pontifice Foundation and the Strategic Alliance of Catholic Research Universities. It stems from the desire of the Foundation to initiate forms of cooperation with the world of universities in order to strengthen its mission of disseminating the Catholic social teaching. In fact, it is our conviction that the role of the educational world is fundamental in addressing and solving the serious problems and challenges of our time. Let me give a few words about the Centesimus Annus Pontifice Foundation. We are a Vatican foundation made up by lay people established in 1993 with the motto proprio of St. John Paul II. Our mission is twofold: to spread the Catholic social teaching and to support the Holy Father's works of charity. We are present in 14 countries with 30 local national groups and about 350 members, inspired by the magisterium of the Supreme Pontiffs in their daily work. We also have an active network of young people to whom we care a lot. The choice of the women's leadership theme for the first joint research is closely linked to the action started in 2017 by the Centesimus Annus, aimed at identifying a new model of fair, solidarity-based, inclusive, and sustainable development in order to eliminate injustice, inequality, poverty, disparities in rights and opportunities. And this includes inequalities affecting women. There are no rational reasons for excluding women from top positions in economics, politics, education, and society as a whole. Nevertheless, in the third millennium, women are still subject to discrimination, prejudice, stereotypes, and violence that prevent their integral development. They are often relegated to ancillary roles, subject to abuse and violence, treated as objects and not as persons created in the image and likeness of God. The situation is very different from country to country, but inequalities persist everywhere, preventing or slowing down changes towards a new world. Women are half of the world's population. They have high talents and potential. If they could enjoy full equality of opportunity and situation, they could contribute substantially to the necessary process of change towards a world of peace, and we need peace right now, inclusion, solidarity, and integral sustainability. The urge to focus on this theme also came from Pope Francis' frequent calls to respect women and give them their recognition in the world. The Holy Father, from the beginning of his pontificate, recalled the need to guarantee women more justice and equality, and to fight the unacceptable phenomenon of violence against women. The words of Pope Francis highlights that the woman is capable of bringing about the rebirth of humanity, of giving hope to the world, of being the solid foundation of the church. Pope Francis has started a path. Our research intends to follow this path and propose concrete actions to be taken in order to reach the necessary empowerments of women in all contexts and sectors of society, and to take advantage of their skills, abilities, and talents. The current situation, characterized by economic, health, climate, and social crisis, intense and unpredictable digital evolution, and great complexities, requires new leadership figures with a long-term view and sensitive to diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. Leaders guided by cooperative competition. These are characteristics that women have. Their greater involvement in top positions and their effective presence in the process of the post-pandemic reconstructions can facilitate the achievement of the necessary new development model proposed by Pope Francis. Amartya Sen, 1998 Nobel laureate in economics, said, and I quote, "Where women are well, everyone is better off." I think that we all want to be better off. Then we have to put women in a position to influence relevant strategic choices by bringing the contribution of their diversity and co-manage the challenges we face. It is not a dream to transform things, giving a relevant role to women. It is possible, but it is very sad to see only men around the negotiating table for the Ukraine. Well, all of that was what I said are the questions that our research aims to address. According to an international and multidisciplinary perspective, the research involves 11 academics from 10 universities in 8 different countries: Italy, Japan, Spain, Portugal, United States, Chile, Brazil, and Australia. Several aspects of overcoming inequalities are taken into consideration: causes and evidence of persistent inequalities, the obstacles for women in the world of science, technology, academia, positive effects of the greater presence of women in various contexts, and the relevance of CAPP as a necessary feature to face the challenges and complexity of the current context. The research addresses some possible educational, political, fiscal, economic, and social strategies to face these issues. Practically speaking, these are providing women with all the skills and knowledge they need to face the new challenges of the world of work. Rethinking the school curricula, assessing the role women have played in history, science, and arts, introducing a gender impact assessment of policies and the legislative initiatives. It could be helpful to allocate resources from a gender perspective. And adopting gender policies by companies, encouraging the promotion of an inclusive language by the media. The key driver, as Professor Agnelli already said, of the joint research project is the consideration of care as the compass for changing thought and action. In our research, care is not just a female feature, but a common feature that all men and women must activate to solve injustice and inequalities and to reach the well-being of everybody and everything. It is the mutual care among brothers and sisters in the human family, as underlined by the Fratelli Tutti's encyclical. Therefore, all human beings, men and women, shall express the ability to take care in all contexts. Instead, the burden of home care has been carried too long by women alone, and this trend has contributed to exclude them from many important opportunities. This is not fair. Women must be helped to express their care skills in science, politics, business, and education. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Professor Anna Marie for that. At this time, I would like to quickly introduce myself and also introduce the panelists for today. My name is Isabel Gill, and I will be the moderator for today's session. By profession, I work in the Dubai Economy and Tourism Division. I've been there for about 9 years, managing the campaigns management as well as the social platforms. My career spans over 18 years plus across journalism sectors. And as a woman, as a caretaker, as a nurturer, as someone from the UAE who has seen a massive transformation of female empowerment across the board, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Without further ado, I'd like to start introducing our speakers for today. Let us start off with Isabel Gill, who is the 6th rector of the Catholic University of Portugal. In 2018, she was elected the first woman president of the International Federation of Catholic Universities and was responsible for the strategic plan, A Global Voice for Common Future, and founder of the Task Force for Women's Leadership of Catholic Universities. Have a seat. Next up, I would love to introduce the only man on the panel today. He's a bit nervous, but we're going to make him very comfortable. My lovely dear friend Piersandro Concocelli is chair professor of food microbiology at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore, where he is the vice rector delegate for internalization, and he is the secretary general of the Strategic Alliance of Catholic Research Universities. Welcome. And next up, we have Silvia Regato, who's the Strategy Managing Director and the Middle East Energy Lead at Accenture in Dubai. She studied at Università Cattolica. Welcome. Unfortunately, we do have a 4th speaker who cannot be with us, but as I mentioned earlier, technology is amazing. And Lisa Cahill is an American ethicist and J. Donald Monan professor at Boston College. She first became known in the 1980s with her studies on gender and sexual ethics, but now she has extended her work to social and global ethics. Hello, Lisa. I'm sorry that we're going to have to give you our back a couple of times, but we can all see you, so you'll notice us turning around a little bit just looking at you as you speak.
It's quite okay. I can see you when you are facing out toward the audience.
Excellent. How we typically like to start is basically putting a little bit of context. Anna Maria mentioned the word care, and we are speaking in the context of more women in leadership. I'd like to start with the panel that's here right now. Let's start with you, Sylvia. Anecdotally, give us a minute roundup of your thoughts on the subject matter.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yeah. So I think that in the past, I would say 10 years, the topic of women in leadership and broader gender diversity has been a top priority for companies around the world and also here in the Middle East. I've been here for the past 9 years and I've seen companies doing more and more and investing always more on having more women in leadership and more women in the workforce. This is not only an ethical imperative, this is a business priority because it's really demonstrated that when women are in leadership and in the workforce, this fosters really growth, value creation, and innovation. Now, we are not there yet, right? So if we look at the composition of boards and the leadership teams, you see that there is still an underrepresentation of women. So today I'd like also to explore a bit more why this is happening in the corporate world. Because many times we hear saying, oh, it's because women are not confident, it's because women are not ambitious, or because they want to take care of family. But the reality is that we need to start shifting the focus and think of how do we make it possible, and how do we create a culture of equality in the work environment?
Thank you for that. Pier Sandro?
Yes, very difficult for me.
By the way,
I'm bringing my experience.
Yes.
My experience. My experience is a man that is working with in science. I'm working in STEM, in life science mainly, and I think that we have to do quite a lot on this topic because, as is just said, we need a balance to increase the efficiency of the system. In terms of in science publication, in terms of spin-off companies or spin-out companies that derives from the work made in the universities. So I would focus today on what are the limitations, and let me maybe later to provide some numbers. I'm a hard scientist, so for me numbers and data are the most important values. And I think we can learn quite a lot by the numbers and to design the next future starting from a research project like that has been just presented by Anna Maria.
thank you for that. Isabel?
Well, I can, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's really a privilege and a pleasure. And I can certainly relate to many of the things that Sylvia was saying. In academia, that's a sector where women have been gaining prominence over the past decades. We can say that overall and roughly, there's a 50-50 percentage of men and women working in academia, but that reality does not translate into leadership positions. And it does not translate, I would say, in top leadership, but specifically on the upper echelons, when we're talking the C-levels. Sylvia was speaking about the boards, on the level of presidents, vice chancellors, or rectors. We see a percentage of women that stands for instance, in the International Federation of Catholic Universities, it's about 7% of women presidents. The European University Association, we're talking about 12%. In the United States, the American Council of Education speaks about 24%, but encompassing from community colleges to the doctoral granting institutions. So when we're speaking simply of institutions that are doctoral granting, so the universities, it comes down to 8%. So there is still a long way to go. And what needs to be changed, we don't need legal frameworks, they exist. We need consistency in policies. And examples of transformational leadership that will, on the one hand, inspire women to take up leadership positions and to be able to serve in that capacity, but also to unpack the hurdles that in academia continue to create a sort of glass ceiling for the upper echelons of the career.
Thank you for that, Isabel. Going on to you, Lisa. You have a very interesting professional yet also personal story. I believe you have 5 children, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. They're adults now, of course.
And then on that context as well, I think we want to hear from your side from an ethical perspective and also connected to the Catholic Church as well. Where do you stand when it comes to the gender inequalities and the biases? Just a 1-minute context so that we can set the framework for the conversations.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm delighted to be here today. It's a wonderful opportunity to share in this event, especially for International Women's Day. And first of all, I would affirm everything that Anna Maria said. I think she covered many of the points that I would also agree with. I think that, as Pope Francis said in 2020, even the Catholic Church teaches many things about equality of men and women, but when it comes to implementing it, it really falls far behind. And I think that that's very true of most moral, ethical traditions, religious traditions even, and that impacts women worldwide, including women in leadership. And I think one of the aspects, of course, is that most women, whether they're elite women like us or whether they're middle-class women or rural and village women and much less privileged situations, women always take on the main burden of care in families and local communities. You know, there are some exceptions, obviously, but that is generally the case. And when we turn to women in the workforce or women in universities, which is my own situation, more often than not, women care a disproportionate share of work at home. So one of the things that really needs to change, and here I'm just reaffirming what others have said, is that there be you know, not just policies about women in higher administration and universities or so on, or women in tenure, but actually social arrangements and social attitudes have to change so that it's possible for women to take advantage of those opportunities. And that means reconsidering not just what womanhood and femininity involve, but also what masculinity involves and what are appropriate roles for men in the family and in, you know, in the professions in academia. So, you know, the double shift of household work as well as workplace work that women carry, I think is really quite an obstacle to the advancement of most women, except for those who are well positioned to afford assistance in their homes. And then often that just plays into, you know, hiring migrant women who have to leave their own families at home and might be not paid adequately or exploited. So we have a big cultural picture that applies differently across different income and status groups, but it presents a complicated set of factors that we all need to take very seriously.
Thank you very much for setting that context, Lisa. I want to bring it home. I want to bring it home a little bit. Coming from the UAE, the founding father, Sheikh Zayed, basically, in a nutshell, quote unquote, said that you cannot progress a society or a community with only 50% of the population, and this resonates very much with, you know, what the Catholic Church is teaching and what the Pope has said as well. And at Expo, at this beautiful venue that we're here, more than 50% of the people, including C-level leadership, is actually made up of women as well. And the theme for the Women's Pavilion, we actually have a Women's Pavilion, so I hope you visited it or will visit it, is actually breaking the gender bias. And it's really interesting to actually put into context that, you know, with the 7.8 billion people living in this world, of which 50% are made out of women, that the disparity seems to be growing in various different areas and sectors. So we want to be able to explore where we can actually make a difference, what are the policies that are related to it. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of the subject matter experts who are sitting with us here today, as well as Lisa. So let's start again with you, Sylvia. We've talked, we had a nice chit chat before, and we thought, oh, well, we had a panel on our own, just the two of us. The culture of equality. What is it? And then how do you actually empower that sort of culture? We want to be able to take away some of these notes as well, because speaking about it versus actually doing it are two different things.
Yeah, and I like what the rest of the panel said. It's not only about words, you know, it's not only about setting ambition, it's moving to action. So what we realized, and at Accenture we have run several research. Every March for International Women's Day we run one. So we have realized that many companies, I would say most of the companies nowadays, have set gender targets. So they have target around how many female they want in the workforce, how many female they want in the leadership team, how many female in the board of directors. But this is not enough, because achieving that target will not really change the mindset. What is important is that companies will create a culture of equality. And what is a culture of equality? We were discussing before starting the panel. There are, I would say, two main things that characterize a culture of equality within a corporate. Point number one is start with a bold leadership. Companies need to set up a bold and diverse leadership that will set diversity targets, communicate these diversity targets, be very transparent about it and about measuring them, right? But on the other hand, we'll also be able to promote and support tangible initiatives to achieve gender equality and create this culture of equality. So everything starts really from the leadership. But then in order to really make it happen, the focus should be on creating an empowering environment. And what does this mean? So we have seen many times that women don't really feel free to speak up. They don't feel well represented in the leadership team. They don't feel they have the same opportunities. Well, creating an empowering environment, it means to create a workplace where everybody, not only women, feel free to speak up. They feel empowered, trusted, and free to innovate. They have and they receive the right training to be able to upskill themselves and be ready to face the challenges that this very fast-changing world is providing to them. It's an environment where people can really feel free to report situations of discrimination or lack of respect without feeling threatened, without feeling afraid of retaliation, and feeling confident that the company will do something about it. And it's also an environment where, I mean, I heard everybody saying women at the end of the day spend a lot of time and carry the burden of taking care of the family. And this is not going to change. It's the nature of women, right? But how can companies leverage the skills, the human potential of women, and create the right environment with flexible working hours, flexible work arrangements? Till 2019, we all thought that we had to go to work every single day, right? And sit behind the laptop 8 hours per day minimum. I think COVID has taught each of us, and today it's a demonstration with this remote connection, that it's possible to work, it's possible to be productive, it's possible to collaborate and innovate, even remotely. So I hope that COVID taught us some lessons that we will be able to leverage to really create a work environment that is really flexible to enable women to balance their personal and professional
I'd like, Sylvia, if you can maybe add what you've done in your organization, maybe one example of something that has taken this notion forward, because I think people would really like to maybe implement it or hopefully execute it in their workplace or in their personal lives as well.
Yeah, so apart from setting the gender diversity targets, and this has been done way before everybody started talking about gender diversity. And the gender target was on two folds. On one end, there was a 50-50% across the entire workforce by 2025, and we are pretty close to achieve that across 700,000 people all over the world. On the other end, we also have a clear target around leadership, women in leadership, 25% by 2021, and we achieved that. On the other hand, we always provide flexible work environment, right? So whenever, for example, a woman comes back from maternity, and we know that, especially in this part of the world, the maternity period is quite short, right? We extended it to 4 months. But we apply a no travel policy for 1 year. So we give the opportunity to women to really stay close to the young children while they still can work. And it's quite normal for us, connect through technology, connect through our laptop and be able to be productive and collaborate. So these are just very few examples, but the nature of our job and the way we treat our employees is very much aligned to, I would say, culture of equality and empowering environment.
Thank you for that. Moving on to you, Pier Sandro. My first question to you is related to STEM, so we should be okay with that. It is said in a study that about 35% of STEM students are women, but this is a global statistic. Is this though reflective in the job sector? And if not, why so?
Yeah, I think that we have to carefully analyze the data. I think that there are a number of segregation that has been happened. Some colleagues of us that are working to this project actually made a much deeper and probably better analysis of the situation. Because you have imagined that universities are very dynamic for certain parts such as research, education, but in terms of recruitment and career are pretty static system, in which you grow up most of the time, at least in the European system. Other systems are more flexible, depending to the time you spent in universities. And I give you very few data about the Italian situation, but it's more or less is the same in Europe, very similar. We have almost 60% of the graduates in general, not only in STEM, that are girls. Okay. If you move to the next step of a career, which is the postdoc, so after the doctoral studies, we are 50-50. 50 girls and 50 boys. And then you start the career, so the next step is the tenure track. Tenure track, we call them researcher. And you see that at this stage, you have still 50-50%. But then the first tenure in university is the associate professor. You start to have an imbalance, and girls, and in that case probably women, are just 30%. But when you move to the full professor, 30%, and as Isabel already mentioned, when you go to the rector or vice chancellor, 15% in Europe. If you go to, and this is, you know that there is limitation, but it takes time. If we just analyze the data of 10 years ago, we have more or less the same proportion of in graduation, a bit less, or more or less 50% girls and boys, but associate professor, instead of 40, were 30 women, and full professor, 20% women. So there is an increase, and I hope, at least from my, I would say, positive view, that we can reach a balance in the next 10 years. It takes time, because you became full professor at generally at 50 years old, so you reflect the situation of when you start the academic career, maybe at 25 years earlier. And this is the situation in university in general. If you look at data on STEM, the situation is what you said, less than 40% are girls that attend courses. But then if you make a better analysis, STEM is a very wide terminology that include science, technology, engineering, and medicine. But there are big differences inside. If you take the biological sciences, including medicine, life sciences, and also mathematics and statistics, we have almost 50% women and girls. If we go to technologies and computer technologies, engineering, in this case you have 20-25% of girls according to the European data. And this is a complex problem. I tell you the data of our medical school in Rome. We have one of the best medical schools in Italy. And we have the chance, there is an entry exam that is pretty hard. 1 out of 30 of the candidates can enter in our university. We have the 60% more, 60% of the candidates are girls, and we have a 60% in the people working in our medical school. So it means that the quality of the students is more or less the same. So what we can do to improve this? I think that we need policies. And being now an old scientist, I remember when I started working with the European projects on research. It was in the 90s, beginning of 90s. And I remember that there was this box in the application form that was gender balance. I had to go to the Oxford Dictionary to understand exactly what's the meaning of that. And then I realized that, discussing with the officer, that it was important to have at least one coordinator that is a female, or if it's not possible, a principal investigator that is so one of the member of the consortium that is a female. If it's not possible, you have to hire postdocs that are female, because this is one of the criteria that was used to assess project and to enter in to win money to make research. And this has been a policy starting 30 years old that is still present in Europe. There is still a gender balance plan that is part of each European research project, but has forced the universities to modify. So we start to say, I cannot just take boys as my postdoc. I have to balance just to try to increase the possibility to gain money from, to make the research that they like to do. So this, I think that we need policies. And within our nectar that is called SACU, the Strategic Alliance of Catholic Research Universities, actually we are collecting the best practices that we have. We are in the lucky situation that we are spread all over the world, and it is very nice to see how is the situation in Japan, in Italy, or in Australia, or in Boston, or in Portugal. So, but European situations are much more similar to that. So we need specific policies. That's the same in companies, taking consideration that university most of the time has not the flexibility which characterize companies.
I think it's policy making and policy implementation across the board. And actually, Lisa, I have a question for you once I'm done with Isabel, but there's always a trifactor effect, right? There's the government, there's the businesses, and then there's the homes and the communities as well. Isabel, just jumping to you after what Piersandro said, we need policies. Do we not have those policies?
We do have those policies, but the problem is not the policies, it's the implementation and really having the instruments inside the institutions to make good on those policies. Piersandro was talking about the gender equality plan, which is absolutely crucial. You ask any university in Europe whether they are or are not for gender equality, everyone will say they are. But when you look at the data, you see that there is so much work to be done. The question of the rectors or the presidents of vice chancellors has to do with the issue of the pool from where they're chosen. If the pool for choice is 20%, which is the full professors, that will naturally narrow the choice. Then there is also a cultural bias. Yes. One chooses what one knows. So naturally, and you have to fight against this natural instinct to choose people to serve on the boards that you manage or on your institution that are like you. So if the choice is made by a board that is mostly composed of men, if the pool is has a majority of male candidates, that will narrow the possibilities of women to even consider the possibility of applying for those roles. And then there's also, Sylvia was talking about this, to empower women to speak out. We come from a culture, a 1,000-year-old culture, where women certainly take leadership positions in the home, but in the public space that has not empowered women to speak out in the public space. That has changed, of course, but the legacy of the anthropological legacy is there, and it has to be fought against. Now, what can we do was the one of your previous questions, and I'd really like to address that, because I look at the stats at my own institution. I'm empowering women and having my colleagues, the younger colleagues, having better possibility of achieving leadership positions consistently, and that does not take away, of course, that we want a 50% balance. It's not about turning the scale around. One of the important things is mentoring women, especially as they move from associate to full. At many institutions, in Portugal, for instance, there is an added hurdle, which is the last review of the career. And it's precisely at that stage, so the cone starts to invert from assistant professor to associate professor. And that is more or less the situation worldwide. There may be differences, but the notion of the inverted cone. What happens there? One explanation, well, when women become assistant professors, that's the fertility time. They become mothers as well. And so that's an explanation. That cannot be an explanation. Institutions need to provide daycare facilities, models, what Elisa was talking, have a social backup system that will allow these fantastic, superb researchers to continue on with their careers. And sharing the burden is important. Maternity is something that needs to be shared in the family between men and women. One of the things that many women rectors, as I'm sure female CEOs also get asked, is how do you do it when you're a mother? This was one of the first questions, right, all the time. I was asked consistently, you have children, how do you do it? Well, I don't see my male colleagues being asked that question, and I'm sure they're eager to be with their children as fathers as we are as mothers. So this cultural perception as well, to train as well those who engage with us, the media. So mentoring, we're starting a mentoring program for assistant and associate professors. Second thing, of course, is we created the position of ombudswoman for gender diversity. So that women, when they feel that they are not being recognized in their merits, that they may appeal to someone who is in the structure but outside the governance, the vertical line of governance of the school or the faculty. And thirdly, of course, the consistent policy to have on all panels parity, so that career progression can be monitored. And it's also important also to consider content. I mean, we don't want to keep having conferences of women speaking about the importance of having, of the women's agenda. We want to have it mainstreamed, right?
Lisa, on to you. I see you nodding your head. There's obviously a lot of really good comments that have come out here as well. Sharing the burden, I think this has pretty much come out across the board, and it leads back to what you've mentioned about care. We are by nature, biologically, the nurturers and the nurturers in our household. Even if you don't have children, right? We automatically take care of our elderly, we automatically take care of our siblings as well. After listening, to both the academic side as well as the business side, is this concept or notion of care and sharing the burden, should it start and has it started at home? As a mother of two boys, I constantly need to remind myself that as much as I empower myself at home, I also need to empower them to understand that it goes both ways. What are your thoughts on it? And I believe in this, again, trifactor system, that it needs to start somewhere, right? Because I think by the time you get to university and get to the workplace, you've already been conditioned to certain norms and policies, right? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you just said. That it's very important in the family, in education, at every level of the upbringing of children and just in society generally, to start to correct this idea that only women are the nurturers, or that it is women's primary responsibility to raise the children and not men's. I would not repudiate totally the idea that in terms of infants and very small children, women have a special bond, perhaps possibly due to biology, certainly due to socialization. But I think that the only solution to this problem of women's advancement really has to be more equal sharing, not only of women in professional and public roles, but of men in domestic roles. And I think that the exclusion of men from those roles really damages men and deprives men of an opportunity that would be really rewarding. Isabel said, the men would also like to be in the home. I think that's true for some. For others, they've been conditioned to think that isn't what a true man is. And I just would like to go back to one little discussion that was being had between Sylvia and Pier Sandro. Sylvia talked about flexible time, part-time, an embargo on travel. And Pier Sandro talked about the gender equality targets. And I can say from the experience that we've had here in the United States, going back maybe 20 years, where law firms and corporations have been implementing part-time schedules, flexible schedules, maybe less travel, that does not always work to the advancement of women, because the men then are more involved, they are looked on as more invested, more committed, and the women tend to fade into the background, which explains what Isabel was talking about, the reduction, and also Pier Sandro, the reduction of numbers of women as you go up the professional or academic ladder. So I support the availability of flex time and part-time schedules and other accommodations, but it's very important to realize that that can be a double-edged sword, because it can play right back into the essential problem, which is the assumption that it is women that need to be taken from the workforce and given more time in the family. So I don't have a solution, I'm sorry to say, but I think this has been a great and very productive discussion.
I'll agree to disagree with you, Lisa. I think we all have the solution, right? And it goes back to, I think, what we've all said in the beginning. It's that first step. So I have a question that I'd like to pose to everybody, because we've talked about some issues, some concerns, some solutions that have been implemented. And we do see, obviously, several benefits of having this disparity or this gender gap being lessened, not widened, even though we're seeing it widened in certain areas and certain sectors. What are the benefits of having women in the workforce, and specifically women in leadership? Start with you, Sylvia.
So a lot of research has been done in this topic, right? And definitely having women in the workforce and having women in leadership is an ethical imperative, but if you look at it from a business perspective, there is a business case, and there is a demonstrated correlation between gender diversity in boards and leadership teams on one end, and profitability of companies, long-term value creation, innovation. And when we talk about value creation in the modern words, I would say that it's not only an economic perception, right? When we talk about value creation, we talk about sustainability, we talk about talents, we talk about employee and customer experience. And we talk, of course, also about financial results. And it's demonstrated that companies that have more gender diversity in their boards and leadership teams are much more likely to outperform, both in terms of profitability and value creation. And on the other end, if you think of the millennials and the new generation who are now entering the job market, 67% of job seekers look at gender diversity of the employer before they decide to apply for a job. And if you take women, 61% of them look at the composition of the leadership team in terms of diversity before accepting an offer. So gender diversity and women in leadership is becoming an imperative if you want to have the best talents. It's not an option anymore. So there is a financial business case, there is a long-term creation, especially in a world that really wants to evolve in the sustainability team, and there is a talent priority that needs to be considered.
Would you like to add anything to that, Pier Sandro?
I think that the data in the university, in particular in my sector, are exactly in line with what Sylvia just said. The research groups, and that in the last years, or the universities, that were able to create an environment with a good ratio between male and female have been demonstrated to be the most productive in science. And science is made with a lot of work, but we need creativity. which is a key point in developing new product, new science, new research, and only mixing all the human properties and characteristics, we can try to be very competitive. And this is clearly demonstrated. If you look at the countries where this gender balance is almost a reality, you can see that there are the better universities and there are the best scientific production. There is still another point that I would like to underline, and that what is the role of universities? The role of universities is provide culture, knowledge. We have to train students, but in particular we have to try to give to the student the possibility to exploit their own properties, their own characteristics, their own features. And this is also related why there is this sort of prejudice of women in STEM. You have to study only social science because you are a girl. That is still sometimes present. It's totally wrong. Among the best mathematicians were female, and I think that sometimes this is only from my personal experience, having one wife and two girls that are actually working, one is still in university, but they are in STEM. And they have a very bright mind, and so we have to use all these opportunities, but in particular as a university we have to give the opportunity to all single person to try to do the best at what they like in their life. So I think that also universities, and in particular also primary and secondary education, are really to work on this, to try to identify in the students, whether they are at the beginning or in the higher education, to identify what are the best path for university and for their next career.
Thank you for that. Isabel, on to you, of course. On a similar strain, you've talked about some policy making and some of the initiatives, but how do women, or in general, improve a workforce? Sylvia mentioned some really critical characteristics, and of course, Piasandra added, exploring the facets of who you are as well. From your perspective, sitting as a rector, how does that sit with you?
I think the notion of leadership has changed tremendously. When we think about universities shape the future of the society. So we are labs for what we are creating in the future. And when we look at organizations and what we want, and looking about the topic of our roundtable, speaking about the common home, we have to be responsible for those who come after. So it's an organization is no longer simply about having a good bottom line. And the leadership roles that in the past were considered the traits that would lead boards to select the leaders: ambition, drive, aggressiveness, efficiency. Yes, efficiency is important. They continue to be important, but they take the back seat before other traits. Empathy, importance to people. You need the institution that thrives is the institution that is best at attracting talent. And the millennial generation is no longer simply moved by the wage and how much they will get with their position. It's the environment, the experience that is provided, right? And the kind of professional environment in which they are and how they can cultivate and thrive, cultivate their characteristics and thrive in that environment. It was very interesting that in our survey, the three main traits that respondents recognized in female leaders were: one, vision; second, empathy; third, attention to people. And I think these three elements, which are crucial because of the experience that women bring with them, are crucial for the world that we're creating, a world that fosters responsibility for our common home, responsible vis-a-vis each other. And Anna Maria was saying that it is really sad and terrible to see that in the peace discussions we see a table of men vis-a-vis men, as well in the Munich Security Conference was a full table, only male leaders. If we want a world where the centrality of the person, the dignity of the person is cultivated to its limits. The experience that women bring into leadership is pivotal. So I would say that is essential.
I like that. Thank you. Lisa, it's the same question, but I want to switch it around a little bit. Due to your background in ethics and the care factor, I can't help but keep thinking, we still have to pay more for our clothing. We still have to pay more for our beauty. We still have to pay. There's still differences in the toy store when you purchase items for your girls versus your boys. And we've talked about the workforce, we've talked about academia, but I just want to route it back again to society and the thought process that it actually goes when you make a clear difference between what's a girl thing versus what's a boy thing. So again, how can we improve those elements without putting you on the spot for a specific answer? But I think that even those things, they automatically, subconsciously keep making us think differently for a boy versus differently for a girl. Oh, sorry, Lisa, we've lost the sound.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying, I totally agree with that. I do think it's a big challenge. I respected what you said a little bit earlier about trying to raise your son so that he realizes that in the home, everybody shares, that men don't have a privileged situation vis-a-vis the women or the sisters. I definitely think that gender-defining toys and clothing, that's okay to a little, to an extent. I'm not sure that adults, men and women all have to dress exactly the same. But there's a lot of gender stereotyping that goes on with little kids, and also advertising. I don't know if your kids watch TV at all, but here in the U.S., kids do, are exposed to advertising and television, and, the marketing is really huge out there, so the kids want to imitate what the peers have. So I think that is something that we need to fight against, not insist that everything be exactly the same, but do our best to expose both our daughters and our sons to the same opportunities, the same type of toys, the same type of summer camps, the same type of educational programs, for example, things that would lead into STEM subjects, and really encourage them to choose what really suits their own personality and their own identity, and encourage them to grow into that in a way that is more gender equal. It's always going to be a struggle. We will never have a completely gender equal universe, so we have to start where we are. And I think the things that everyone has mentioned are really wonderful contributions.
All right, I think we're coming close to the end, but I'm actually kind of sad because I feel that this conversation could go on for days, perhaps, if not weeks. But I want the audience here and the ones watching to take away at least 3 valuable things that they can then impart within their circle of influence. I'll start with you, Piesandro. How about that? Putting you on the spot. He's such a fantastic guy. I didn't realize he had so many women around him, and he was like, oh, I'm not the right person. But what you've said has really resonated. And seeing the other 50% of the gender actually representing your side, it's good for us to also hear the opposite gender telling us what is important. And what is important is for you to have 50% representation, across the workforce and academia. So 3 things that you can impart the audience with.
You always ask me difficult questions. Yeah, I'm a man. No, sorry for joking. I think that is the time to really to make some take-home messages on what I just said. And I think that there are 3 aspects that we have to consider. First, what Lisa said about the role of male really touched me, and I was thinking what I did, and I'm sure that it's very important, is balance, but I'm a molecular microbiologist, and bacteria have no sex, so it's very easier and this is my experience. But coming back to what is my life, and so it's nothing of professional, it's really that we have to try to engage much more, and the male partner of a family in the care of children, and this is fundamental. But I think that the newer generation, this is already a reality. At least in Italian situation, from my experience, it is already a reality. Then there is the education path. This is fundamental. Education, the role of school, the role of primary, secondary school, and I know about university because I'm working over the last more than 30 years in a university, so this is my environment. This is fundamental. We need to really to create the environment where this balance is part of the daily life. But then there is something that we have to do more. I read a very interesting paper in these days just to study something before coming on this stage. And there is a book that is published a few months ago at the end of 2021, which is on the role of women in STEM entrepreneurship. And there is a very interesting study with a lot of statistics and p-values and things that I like, and in which there is a clear demonstration with a high number of subjects that if universities are able to create an environment in which there is some of the soft skills, such as the ability to make an enterprise, is one of the topics. You have a higher rate of university spin-outs companies, but you have a higher rate of spin-outs companies that are managed by women. Well, the starting point is the interest for entrepreneurship, according to these studies, in girls is generally half of the, if I remember the data, the question, are you willing to start a business after the university by yourself? The boy response is 15% yes, and the girls at the end of university is just a half. But in the major factor affecting this value is the role that the university may have in providing the soft skills for doing that. So I think that we as experienced, not to say age professor, we have really to rethink the way in which we train our students and try to support all these opportunities, provide all these opportunities to both boys and girls.
Thank you for that, Piesandro. Isabel, I'll move to you. You mentioned something very interesting when we were talking outside, and I asked if you could actually mention it while we were speaking here, is that you do not want to be seen as a token of being the first. Can you mention a little bit about that, and then the 3 takeaways that everybody can have?
Yes, I think for the contingencies of life, I've been the first in many occasions, in many situations, first woman president of IFCU, first woman in other situations as well. But I am the second woman rector at my university. In a country that has, amongst the 16 universities, only 3 women rectors. Our university is the one that has, over the years, had the highest number. Tokenization is an issue at institutions. To say that when, well, if you have a woman leader, that means equality is accomplished. We have no issues there. I completely disagree. I think that you have to be wary of being used as a token so that nothing will change. But on the other hand, being a woman in that position also allows you to take up the reins and make the necessary change. So it has both faces, right? And it is important to take the position to really implement consistency. it's always better to be second, third, because it means that the institution has a consistency and that change has happened. But now, my three takeaways, I would take two to start. One, to see women for what they really are and not for what your cultural projections, which is normal. We grow up, we thrive in a society that is shaped by gender-neutral perceptions, which are male default perceptions. There's an interesting study by Caroline Perez that has come out titled "The Invisible Women," which very truly shows how gender-neutral is more often than not the male default. So see women for what they are. And secondly, to truly make an effort to consider at every stage, it is almost natural, instinctual for us when we're creating a committee for progression, when we're setting up a board, when we're creating a group of guests for a conference. This male default, this male bias is not something that only that is proper to men. It's proper to women as well. Right? It is, we thrive in that environment. When we create a syllabus, there are as many great women scientists, researchers as male. When we look at syllabi, it is important also to take that into consideration. And also to mainstream women's topics in general, in the general conversation of science, not to make it something that is that specific niche difference on the side, but to mainstream it when we're talking about entrepreneurship, macroeconomics, mathematics, physics, history, right? It's not simply to have that specific difference, which is the meaning.
Thank you for that, Isabel. Lisa, I'll jump on to you. You said something that was really interesting. I mean, as much as we're saying, add more women into, this disparity clause, right, which we have so many of, you've said actually introduce men into what women are doing, which I think is a completely different mindset of what people would typically say, right? It's like, put more women here, put more women there, but actually, why don't the men catch up to what we've always been doing, which is the caring and the nurturing? It's about time. 3 takeaways from your end, Lisa.
Yeah, so thank you. I agree with that, obviously. And I think there's been resonance with that around this panel. So the first thing I would just say is that we here who are privileged men and women, especially on International Women's Day, need to be mindful of the much more vast disparities in gender expectations and restraints that exist around the globe. And I just would want to emphasize that gender-based violence, for example, or extreme gender discrimination hurts men as well as women. So we need to come into a new form of caring humanity together, I guess. The second thing is that we've talked a lot about different policy interventions, different things we can do in the family. And I'm just really impressed through our conversation with the need to be very attentive to the concrete impact of different gender inclusion policies. Whether it's something like, unintended consequences so that women indirectly are actually getting sidelined through accommodations, or, whether it's tokenism, as some people have talked about. So if we're a more senior person in a corporation or a university and we have a junior colleague with young children, whether it's a man or a woman, really try to help that person negotiate so that they can accommodate the family, take advantage of policies, and still be equally positioned to get tenure or whatever the next promotion might be. And then, the third thing, Aida, you really brought up into my mind very clearly, and it's simply by your mention of your family and the different clothes and toys and so on. And I realize that it's so key to just start chipping away at gender bias and stereotypes wherever we meet them in our own environment. and not just in a negative way, but to build up more inclusive imaginations about what it is to be man or woman or to embrace a gender. It's not just androgyny, but we need to think about things that we haven't really considered before in terms of opportunities. That's something we'll all be working on as we are here today. So once again, I thank you for the chance to have been a part of it.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And last but not least, Sylvia, you said a couple of things that really shook a chord internally. You couldn't see it on my face, but you added the words value add and sustainable a little bit earlier on, where we were talking about what women do bring to the table in the workforce. And you've been here almost a decade, so you've seen the value add that you've brought to the table and the transformation, across the region. So maybe a couple of takeaways from your end as well as we close.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to leave with a couple of messages, one for companies and one for women. For companies, we have been talking about gender diversity for 10 years, more or less, right? And I think that everybody had the opportunity to think about it, to discuss it, to write policies, processes, frameworks, KPIs, targets, and strategies, right? It's time to move to action. And it's not that difficult. It's just enough to select smart women. And I have to say that women are quite well prepared. Select them, put them in leadership committees, leadership teams, boards, senior positions. And you will see how companies will rotate in a very natural way, make it normal to have women in the leadership position. And for women, I would say that it's not easy, right, to climb the ladder and get to a leadership position. It's not easy in an environment where there are very few women that can be your role model and who went up there. But there are a few things that women should really consider, even in a kind of like hostile environment. First of all, they need to believe in themselves. If you don't believe in yourself, you will never make it, right? And others won't believe in you. And other people will not believe in you. The second point, and this was, I would say, one of the things that helped me to go through my career journey is get a business sponsor, someone who believes in you, a senior leader who helps you out to grow throughout your career. And the third point is build your support system. You will never get there alone. If you look at men tend to create a team. Men tend to help each other. We as women don't do that. We don't do that among each other. We don't do that with men. But who's your support system? My support system has been my family, my close circle of friends, few women at work, people that help you to cheer up the moments when the day is tough, but also people that encourage you and give you the strength and the power to really go through the journey to get to leadership.
Thank you so much. To our panelists today who are here present and who are not here, hopefully, Lisa, we can get you down to Dubai sometime very soon in the near future. And obviously to the audience, the Italian Pavilion, the Cattolica Università as well, for this amazing platform. My final takeaway is, women and men, of course, also need to come full circle in a lot of things, right? We start by saying something, and then I think life takes over and we pause and we restart again. But going full circle ensures that angle of sustainability that we all mentioned, right? Whether it's from an educational perspective, from a workforce perspective, as a mother, as a nurturer, building that support system that we spoke about, and I think support systems actually can come from anywhere. You can learn from someone who mentors you and supports you, all the way to someone who probably you wouldn't expect, could teach you something, a kind word or a nice message. And I think that's something that we need to do a little bit more of. And on behalf of all of us here today, happy International Women's Day. I think if this is the caliber of people that we're dealing with, then definitely the future is a lot brighter for both men and women. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you all.